All right, just to return where we were. Sorry, my recording had some issues there. Carbon dioxide, less steep because the gradient or the solubility is higher. Carbon dioxide more soluble. It doesn't take as much to make carbon dioxide move. This is a great. It shows that gradient. There it is in the alveoli. Here is blood entering the lungs, 40 and 45. Here's the pressure in the alveoli, so oxygen moves in the blood, carbon dioxide moves out. We have to match the amount of blood that goes to the lungs with the amount of air that's here. This is called ventilation perfusion coupling. Ventilation, how much gas is getting there, perfusion, how much blood is getting there, and we match this for efficiency. Oxygen changes the diameter of the blood vessels. The only reason blood goes to your lungs is to pick up oxygen. Oxygen there, screw it. So when the pressure of oxygen in your lungs is high, the blood vessels dilate. You get more blood flow to the lungs. When it's low, you get less blood flow to the lungs. There's no oxygen, there's no reason for blood to go there. Carbon dioxide changes the diameter of the airway. If there's too much carbon dioxide in the lungs, get rid of it so the bronchioles dilate so you can exhale it. There's not enough, they constrict so that you. Oxygen changes the diameter of the blood vessels. Carbon dioxide changes the diameter of the bronchioles. If fluid builds up inside the lungs, it's difficult to get air across that fluid. We increase the respiratory membrane thickness, and it's difficult to make it happen. Internal respiration is exchanging the gases in the tissues and the capillaries, and the opposite is true for gradients. Oxygen moves out, carbon dioxide moves in. Again, you already knew that. This chart so much. Oxygen and carbon dioxide are transported in the blood. Oxygen is carried by hemoglobin. How does that work? Well, oxygen binds to hemoglobin. As one oxygen sticks to the hemoglobin, it changes the shape a little bit, and then it makes it easier for the hemoglobin to stick. It's positive feedback. The hemoglobin is fully saturated if all four heme groups have oxygen. How quickly this happens and how quickly it's unloaded is all right. So, how do we contract the muscles in your hand? Like move your fingers a lot. Okay. What's happening in those muscles? Well, they're using more oxygen. So the partial pressure of oxygen in those tissues is going down. They're generating heat. They're generating carbon dioxide. Are you having to breathe more to compensate for that? No. Why? Because decreasing oxygen, increasing temperature, increasing carbon dioxide, ignore that. Those things cause oxygen. Conditions from an active tissue make hemoglobin let go of oxygen. You don't have to breathe harder, you just let go of more oxygen. This brings us to the oxygen hemoglobin dissociation curve. Now, what you would expect is not that, it's this. You would expect that as oxygen levels go up, saturation levels go up proportionally. That is not the case. Instead, we get this curve. This curve means that oxygen is nearly completely saturated at a much lower partial pressure than what we actually have. Putting you on oxygen, like right now, assuming everything's normal, if I put you on oxygen, you're not going to get any benefit. You're already at like 98% saturation. So in arterial blood, the partial pressure of oxygen is about 100. That's 98% saturated. Breathing deeply, breathing pure oxygen, it's not going to help anything. In the venous blood, partial pressure of oxygen about 40. Hemoglobin is still 75% saturated. Hold your breath. The reason you can hold your breath is because there is still oxygen in the blood. Even the venous blood still has oxygen. This is redundant. You've got more than enough oxygen to spare. So you can hold your breath. You can afford to let go of more oxygen as tissues become active without breathing harder, without the heart beating harder. In fact, hemoglobin is nearly completely saturated at pressures as low as 70 millimeters of mercury. Only about 20-25% of oxygen gets unloaded. If oxygen levels in the tissue drop, then oxygen, all it has to do is disassociate. You don't have to breathe harder. You don't have to work harder. You just let go of more oxygen. Other factors that influence hemoglobin saturation. These are the things that we see in active tissues. Active tissues create a situation where they get more oxygen. More oxygen lets go of hemoglobin. We're not going to get into the shifting of the curve to the left or right, so don't worry about that. Realize that active tissues, cells metabolizing glucose, heat production, that creates a situation that weakens the hemoglobin oxygen bond. Active tissues need more oxygen, and the byproducts of activity cause hemoglobin to let go of oxygen. Hypoxia is when you don't get enough oxygen in tissues. All right, carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is transported in plasma, dissolved, or somewhat bound to hemoglobin. Most carbon dioxide is transported as bicarbonate. How does that work? Well, carbon dioxide combines with water, which turns into carbonic acid, which dissociates into bicarbonate in this ion. Happens in the red blood cell. That bicarbonate leaves the red blood cell, a chloride moves in. It looks like this. Right there. So now we put that bicarbonate out in the blood. You need to know that most carbon dioxide travels in the blood as bicarbonate. In the pulmonary capillaries back of the lung, the opposite happens, and you get rid of the carbon dioxide. How much carbon dioxide you transport is influenced by how much oxygen there is. The lower the oxygen, the more carbon dioxide you can carry. As carbon dioxide enters the blood, oxygen lets go. Carbon dioxide changes the pH of your blood. All right. That bicarbonate is what we call the alkaline reserve, and it makes the blood a buffer. A buffer resists changes in pH. We'll talk more about pH of blood later and how ventilation. So right now, ignore this. We're not going to get into control of respiration with the brain, the respiratory rhythm. This, however, is important. Hold your breath again. At some point, you're going to have to breathe. Why do you have to breathe? You didn't breathe because you ran out of oxygen. You had to breathe because of carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is the major respiratory stimulant. As carbon dioxide levels go up, it accumulates, you get carbonic acid, and it causes you to breathe. Hyperventilation is when you get rid of too much carbon dioxide. Oxygen is much less important. It takes a substantial drop in oxygen. Oxygen has to get in like 60 millimeters of mercury to cause increased ventilation. Carbon dioxide is the major respiratory stimulant. And we're going to talk about this later, so ignore it at the moment. There's this big thing. You ever seen free divers? Free divers are like scuba divers, minus the scuba. So these guys hold their breath for like 15 minutes and dive as deep as they can. And try to come back up. The goal of the sport is to not drown. How do you hold your breath that long? Well, they hyperventilate first. They intentionally hyperventilate. They breathe really, really fast. They blow off all the carbon dioxide they can. And so then when they dive, their body's building up that carbon dioxide, but it didn't start with any. So carbon dioxide built up and builds up and builds up. At some point, that carbon dioxide, there's enough of it that you're going to breathe. If you're still underwater when that happens, you're going to drown. If your kid ever tells you they're going to hold their breath till they die, let them do it. They're not going to die. Carbon dioxide built up, and they're going to have to breathe because it's the respiratory stimulant. It's not until the oxygen goes below 60 millimeters of mercury before it becomes respiratory. You can change breathing with higher brain centers, like did with holding your breath. We're not going to get into irritant reflexes. This Herring-Brewer reflex is a protective mechanism, so you can't overinflate your lung. And not super worried about that. We're going to go through exercise here. Not worried about that. We just talked about alpha. COPD is chronic bronchitis and emphysema. If I have time, we'll look at that later, but right now we're not going to talk about pathophys at the moment. Or development. All right, so this is where we're going to wrap up respiration stuff. After this, you want to look at renal stuff. There are also respiratory and renal reviews on here as well. So I encourage you to look at that. One of the big things will be acid-base stuff, and we'll talk about arterial blood gas after we go over acid-base. So that's it for respiratory. Next should be renal.